I think Trick of the Tail, we're definitely worried about what came next, and we definitely thought, would it work? So we did what we always do, is we said, let's go in and try a bit of writing, see what happens.
I think we had a great deal of fear about how people would see us without Peter. I think we were very confident we could write material that was strong enough. And the problem was obviously, first of all, finding a singer. And then even if we found a singer, how people would respond to that new singer.
Although I loved Pete and still do, you know, my feeling of, well, we'll just carry on as a four-piece. Forget the vocals, we'll just carry on as an instrumental four-piece, which is what I said. There was no slight on him, it was actually meant to be the fact that I thought we could just carry on and still do it. And in fact, in doing it, proved to people that we weren't Pete's band.
Well, I think initially what happened was that, you know, we sort of thought at a certain point that Phil could probably sing some of the songs. He'd done obviously done things like More Fool Me and done a lot of backup singing to Pete on various songs prior. So we felt we knew he had a lovely soft voice. So we thought things like Ripples and Mad Man Moon, things like that would be great for his voice. But we really weren't sure that he was. We never even contemplated that he'd be any right for Squonk or Volcano. These things that required a bit more power. And yes, we did get, we'd obviously recorded the song, and we did get this singer that we liked, and he came in and sang on it.
He was our big hope. He'd made it through those audition processes and sort of arrived. But we weren't in a sort of even thinking about keys for singers. I mean, now we just sort of, you know, can you sing this, or do you want us to take it down a bit, you know? And you think about it, but we didn't think about it then. Such was our contempt for the vocals. But so we laid down all the backing tracks and invited this guy in to sing. Squonk was the first one, and it was plainly the wrong key for the guy, so there was no way he was going to sound good.
And so then Phil said, let me have a try at it, because I think the rather sort of the crunchy voice that the Peter had, that cracks a bit, you know, that side of the voice, Phil hadn't really got or done yet, but he had a go at it, and it sounded good. That was probably the turning point, really.
I think after years of doing, The Artful Dodger and being trained as a child actor and all that kind of stuff, I think that he had the idea in his younger days that being a drummer was a much more respectable gig. And he probably wouldn't have come forward as the lead singer if Peter hadn't left. But then, you know, in the old days, Pete and Phil used to twin vocals a lot of the time, and it used to sound like a kind of automatic double track, because they had a similar kind of edge to their voices. I mean, different singers, of course, both very soulful in different ways. But I don't know, I'm just very glad it happened, frankly.
They got no horns and they got no tail. They don't even know of our existence.
And then we went through the songs one by one, knocking them off, really. And we finished the album, I don't know how long it took, a couple of weeks probably, finished the album, and said, right, that's it. Now let's find a singer to go and take it on the road, you know. So we went again through a very half-hearted audition process. And really we didn't do it seriously. We just thought we'd find a singer, and then we realised once we started looking that we were just doing the same thing we'd just done. So my first wife, I believe, suggested, why don't you do it? And I kind of, the whole idea of coming out from behind the drum kit appalled me, really. But as I'd done the album, there didn't seem to be much alternative, so I suggested it to the guys. They weren't sure that if I could do it from a physical point of view, I think. They knew I could sing, but they didn't think I could maybe just do what singers do. And I didn't know if I'd find a drummer that I wouldn't be looking around and tutting at, you know.
I think the fact that we've got Bill Bruford at that point, you know, was an important addition for us. So a drummer that Phil understood, you know, that knew and liked, and felt could do the job. So that kind of whole package sort of happened all in one go like that, really.
I think it's pretty rare that a band has got that ability to be able to, as I say, within the ranks, have someone that could just follow on that professionally.
It was a lot of luck involved in it. That we had a singer who was good enough in the band to take over from Peter, and for that reason, I think the fans had no trouble, you know, considering Phil as the man.
On your left and on your right, crosses are green, the crosses are blue. Your friends didn't make it through.
I remember Trick of the Tail, we had a brief. We said, let's try and be a bit more instrumental. Because we thought, some of our strongest passages in the past, without Peter, were instrumental moments. But of course, as always, you have no control and it's a heavily vocal album.
Through a crack in Mother Earth, blazing hot, the molten rock spills out over the land.
Dance to Volcano was the most started off with, for day one, when Mike, Phil and I were there, because Steve in fact was finishing off his solo album, and we came in the studio and we just started improvising, and what became the first part of Dance to Volcano came out of that. And I was at that moment, I felt, having come in with a little bit of trepidation, thinking, well, what's going to happen, how's it going to be without Pete and all that. We wrote that and I thought, this is great, I'm really excited by this, and I think it set us off in a really good direction.
It kind of embodied all that Genesis did well, which was quite majestic, powerful stuff, interesting rhythms, good melodies. It's like an AR man, don't I? But it's actually, it did. I think Volcano really, the intro had a drama and excitement, and if you'd heard it, you'd kind of go, oh, what's that? That sounds great. That's an important track. I'm not sure the rest of it was always up to scratch, but the intro and the sort of first bit I thought was very strong.
I came in perhaps with the most complete songs. Mike came in with sections. And as did Steve, and as it happened, the bits we used to sort of finish them off were my bits. So I ended up being credited on every track on this album, which was sort of like quite funny. But on a song like, for example, Entangled, which was Steve had come in with this really nice sort of guitar bit, and it happened to be in 3/4, and I had this chorus that was sort of hanging around. I hadn't got any home for it, which was in 3/4 as well. So we tried the two together, and it worked really well. And it kind of, what Steve had written really didn't have a chorus. It needed something to kind of lead you to it. So the sort of, if we can help you, we will, that bit. I had this sort of split. I'd written on a piano, in fact, and I'd transferred it to guitar, and with the voice then singing what the piano used to play, which is kind of like the way the chords changed, produced quite a nice sort of harmony piece, I think. And it makes for, I think Entangle's one of my favourite songs on the album. I think it makes for a very strong combination with a lyric written by Steve, which I think works really well as well.
What I used to do was probably throw in a few riffs and licks rather than whole songs. Although there was Entangled and there was Los Endos and the outro of, what was it, Dance on a Volcano, those sort of things, sort of kick in with those ideas. But I'd just come off the back of having done a solo thing, so I was fairly dry of ideas, and I was having to think on my feet, and it wasn't really until the following album, Wuthering, that I'd amassed a lot of stuff to throw at everybody.
A fair amount of the album was from scratch. Like Volcano was just a jam that started. Skunk just sort of came on the day, I think, I can't remember. And Los Endos was a sort of jam thing that was developed. So it was quite sort of live and jammy at that stage.
Skunk was a musical standout. I mean, I've always liked that. The idea of that. I mean, that was always our Zeppelin kind of song. That was our kind of a bit of Kashmir, a bit of When the Levee Breaks. I mean, when you listen to it, it doesn't sound like that, but that's what it was meant to be. These heavy guitar chords and sort of me with my John Bonham hat on. And so I think that's probably one of the standout tracks.
And I remember doing Madison Square Garden, where we used to start off with, and that might have been a slightly later era, but we were still doing Squonk. We were using that as an opener. And I remember going on stage and the whole audience standing up as we kicked in with the first strains of that. And it was that was a really powerful live number.
It's a funny thing, really, because when at the time we did it, I mean, things like Volcano and Squonk and everything were ones I really liked. But coming back to it, the ones I actually prefer all the soft songs, I think. Mad Bad Moon has always been a big favourite of mine, I suppose, but it was a song I wrote on my own completely. And, I was very pleased with some of the things. I mean, the middle is not played as well as it should be, But the verse parts and everything, it's just nice. The chord sequences, the chord changes and things, I was very pleased with them at the time, because they're sort of like, they're unusual, but then don't necessarily sound too unusual. And I think that's a good thing about a song. I don't want it to sound weird. I just want it to sort of be kind of, and it's very romantic, I suppose. And I think that works very well. Let me think what else. Well, Los Endos, I think it works very well. I mean, it certainly sounded a great live piece. It was great fun to play, and I felt it really rounded off the album well.
It was kind of more my baby than anybody else's. I mean, obviously melodically, I'd say down, back down, 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 and Tony would sort of make sense of the kind of the humming it. And of course, it's become over the years, it's one of the long-lasting songs from that album because it was a great stage song. And then we reprised Squonk at the end of it because that was kind of gave the album a bit of a bookends feel. So that's always been one of my favourite things on the record, Los Endos.
I think Los Endos, in a way, is quite a special track, and it's becoming more and more special in my mind as time goes on, actually, because not many bands do a sort of what I call a 7-minute instrumental with a sort of jazzy feel, and we're still playing it.
Album covers can give a very strong identity to an album, I think, and 𝗜παι𝘁𝗄𝗏𝗄𝗏 is one where that's the case, really, and you get this idea of a sort of storybook sort of feel out of it, and the songs are quite distinct and a lot of the songs do have a kind of story to them, and I think that makes it very strong.
I would say that the cover for 𝗜παι𝘁𝗏𝗏𝗄𝗏 was out of character, actually, with Hypnosis, given what they normally do and what we know them for. The Floyd covers and some Zeppelin and 10cc and our other ones, they didn't kind of do this rather slightly romantic-y, softer drawing style.
Slightly sort of Dickensian kind of look, I think, which worked just so nicely on the brown on the sort of on that kind of parchment-like paper. When it came out, I think it was a funny thing. There was a certain element of the public who really were quite glad to not have Pete there, because he's sort of made it kind of seems so strange, in some ways. But I mean, other part of that I really like. But anyhow, there was a kind of some people who had a bit of trouble with Pete. There was a time to reassess, put it like that. And we're also lucky that at that particular period in time you didn't need a hit single, because obviously there's no hit single on this album. And I think a lot of the existing fans really liked it, and then we've got some new fans, and it just seemed to sort of take off, I suppose, really. I mean, I think the previous album having been a double album as well meant that this album had a chance, it was a bit easier for people to take in. And as you say, it starts very strong with Volcano. I think people put it on and think, yeah, that sounds fantastic. And then, with songs like sort of, obviously, like Entangled and Ripples, which have got very strong choruses, I think it works on a lot of levels.
And then it did very well. And I think a lot of people had a reappraisal of Genesis too, actually. I think people who hadn't liked us heard a slightly different sound and gave us another chance.
It felt great because the band was on the grow. We managed to survive the loss of our erstwhile lead singer, and Phil was doing a great job taking over. I mean, doing it in another kind of way. I mean, in a much less dressy, more kind of earthy kind of way.
Yeah, audiences really were behind us, but behind me succeeding in this new role, because they still had their band, I mean, if I hadn't made it happen, or if it hadn't have worked, or if they hadn't embraced the album and then the live version of it, we wouldn't be here talking now. So, and I think the people didn't want the band to split up, and I think they, this was their thing. They wanted to try, annual visits to Toronto, annual visits to Montreal, Chicago, Sheffield. People like to see the band, and so I think they kind of they were willing it to happen, willing it to work.
I suppose Wind and Wuthering came after a bit more confidence, having had Trick of the Tail do well. I think in some respects, the edge and the excitement of Trick of the Tail, the edginess of will it work or not, and did work, for me made Wind and Wuthering, the writing seemed a little flatter to me, I think, because it was slightly more, you're thinking about it more. You'd done the first one without thinking about it, just gone and done it without Peter, and this was like the second one's always a bit harder. The second album, they always say, I think Wind and Wuthering is probably very much Tony's album favourite. He was very much, I think, involved in the sound of that one. It's probably the album we both had the most, I think, influence, actually. One for the Vine, Afterglow. And I always see it as a feminine album. There are no real kind of ballsy driving songs on this album, which I think has probably suffered for a little bit. But I think Afterglow is still a classic. I think it still sounds great.
But I would search everywhere.
And actually another song I think is very important is Blood on the Rooftops, which is quite important, a big part of Steve on that one. And it's a lovely song. It's a forgotten song. And every time you hear it, you kind of go, wow, that's nice. I didn't rate that so much. I think it's one of Steve's best moments, actually, on the writing side, really.
There's quite a lot of music written beforehand on this album, and I think when we finished the album, the only thing that worried me a little bit was perhaps the album was more, particularly when we left off the 3 tracks we did, which were all kind of quite simple tracks, that the album was really quite a heavy album, quite a difficult album. But I mean, I liked that. You see, I always thought I like an album to be a challenge, and it wasn't an album that was going to be liked first time. Apart from possibly Your Own Special Way, virtually every other track requires quite a bit of listening, I think, to get into. And but at that time, I think, we were able to, I think we had people who were prepared to give us the time. Some people, I remember the reviews of the album were a bit like, oh, disappointing after Trick of the Tail type thing. But I think for the fans, it's a better album.
Pete and Tony were like this, I mean, best of friends, but like this. And possibly with Peter having long gone by this point, Tony realising that possibly, he was able to sort of, like Mercury, kind of sort of spread out a little bit and get much more of him out. And of course, with me not writing, and maybe Steve writing, but not everybody liking what he was bringing in, there was only him and Mike, really, apart from us as a group, which was always a very important part of us. I mean, us writing together out of nothing was always one of the strong things of Genesis, anyway. But so for feminine, read Romantic. For romantic, read Tony. So.
I think it's a romantic album. That's probably why I like it as much as I do. I'm sort of, perhaps that era of music excites me more in a way. The chords are much more sort of expansive, if you like, and the way they change is sort of more yearning. It's not. This is about as far away as you can get from sort of straight ahead 3-chord rock, and I like a bit of that myself, but this album's is far away from it.
They get me confused, boy, puts me off to sleep, and the thing I hate, oh Lord.
I enjoyed doing Blood on the Rooftops. I mean, I took a flyer on that one by doing this whole sort of classical guitar introduction to it. So I enjoyed doing that. I think that came out very well. I think it's a very well produced album. I think that, as I say, particularly with the new mixes, you can hear a little more guitar.
It's kind of been growing in confidence, I think, over the years with Genesis. I mean, you must appreciate that when we started off, that both Phil and Steve were very much junior members, particularly in relation to the composition. And I think at this stage, with Mike and I had sort of perhaps been the dominant, certainly on Trick of the Tail, and we probably were on Wind and Wuthering as well, I think. But he definitely had more moments when he came to the fore. And this was particularly true, I think, on Blood on the Rooftops, which I think is a lovely track. It's one of my favourite tracks we did.
Blood on the rooftops, and you sing the spring.
The chorus musically of Blood on the Rooftops was Phil's, and the idea for the title of the song was Phil's, Blood on the Rooftops. I did the rest of the lyrics and the verse and the intro, so that's me, and luckily the band went to town on it, and we had Mellotron and everything, and it's pretty sort of dark, very English sounding tune, where all the levels of action happen on the TV. So it's a sort of song about couch potatoes in a way, but maybe the younger generation is differing slightly from what the older generation is saying. Yeah, it's not a bad lyric.
At that time, you see, we're talking about 77, and I had yet to really write. I wrote bits. One of my bits ended up on the Lamb. My strength in Genesis, even though I was the singer, up until and including Wind and Wuthering, was as an arranger. I could see how other people's material could work, or could be arranged like this or like that, or why don't you play that and I could play this. An interpreter, if you like. And so I had these little bits, and I think Steve and I think probably reading between the lines, Steve was starting to get a bit frustrated because he had his material that he was doing on his own albums, and obviously this was probably the last album he did. So he, by this point, without me knowing, certainly he was starting to feel a bit frustrated about his lack of, ability to sort of contribute to the band.
Probably throughout the whole of the period with the band. I mean, I always thought, what would it be like if I wasn't with the band? I mean, I used to think that the band were very accomplished songwriters, and I very often used to find it intimidating working with people who were so gifted and who were so quick and brilliant. And it took, I think, a long time for my confidence, to get to the point where I felt like an equal. I think it probably didn't happen until Wind and Wuthering, really.
When Pete left, we had a moment we suddenly realised, we kind of went, shit, do you know what? We've always called a song Genesis, which means no one knows who wrote what. And as one always imagined the singer writes most of it, we suddenly thought, God, if any people knew who wrote what, they wouldn't be so worried about what comes next. But of course, you can't suddenly tell them that. So I think after that, subconsciously, we started to sort of push more our own credits. Who wrote what, you know what I mean? And I think individually, and that's probably not a... And the next album was the worst one of all, and then Duke, we started going back to how we started originally, writing together more. So we were heading in the direction, I think, where it was like a couple of my songs, a couple of Tony's songs, a couple of group songs. It was a funny road we were taking.
Three main songs I wrote on this, I wrote totally on my own, which was obviously the One for the Vine, Afterglow, and All on a Mouse's Night. When I played One for the Vine to the guys, it was kind of like I just played the whole thing through with me sort of warbling on top, and I don't know what they thought at the end of that. I thought, but I think they thought if we don't do it, he'll get so irritable, start throwing things, that we'll have to have a go at it, So we just put it down in the studio. I just put the whole thing down with the piano and drums, really, and then we sort of overdubbed everything else on top of it. And it was just faith, really, in the end, that they sort of stuck with me, I think, because I think it turned out good, actually, and I think the contribution of all the others is really good as well. So it's I was quite pleased with that. But I mean, because that song had really taken me, since Trick of the Tail, I'd sort of been working on that and honing it and trying to get it right. Whereas the song Afterglow, which was the final song, I really wrote just about in the time it took to play it. I just sort of sat down and thought, I just fancied using that chord sequence, and then started singing on it. And I was really excited by that, because I thought, I don't normally do things like that. And then about a couple of days after I'd written, I suddenly thought, shit, what I've done is I've written Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas again. It was a terrible thought, and I was thinking, Have Yourself, and I listened to that particular song and realised it wasn't the same. I could get away with it, but it's a terrible moment when you think, God, I'll never get away with it. But so I mean, I think Afterglow, which obviously then became a big stage favourite, it was just a very strong kind of sort of anthemic kind of piece, which I think closed the album really well. So I think I just was very pleased with that.
𝗜ʰ𝘁𝗲𝗿𝘃𝗶𝗲𝗄𝗏 was actually one of my favourite songs on the whole record, because it was a bit more of my Los Endos thing coming in the door. It was my fusion kind of weather reporting side of me that I was able to sort of make Tony Banks play this stuff, and they seemed to like it. So that ended up on the album.
In those days, I was still doing a lot of guitar tunings, playing 12 strings with funny, weird tunings. sometimes tuning the double strings in harmony, which is quite unusual. And Your Special Way was done with a funny tuning. What it was, I think I haven't got a clue of funny it again, so I can't see us doing it on stage. I'd find a way to play it straight chords. But it was a nice moment. It was a single in America too. And suddenly, it was the first time when the record label thought, it didn't do anything, but it got some airplay. They felt, hang on, this band can do something that we can actually play on the radio, apart from the long songs that got played on late night radio. So it was the sort of start of a tickle in America, I think, from that sense.
At the same time as we were doing Wuthering, there was this punk thing was starting as well, which we kind of just didn't really glance at too much. We just ignored it.
And Genesis were always slightly outside the loop in terms of the firing line, which is not a bad thing actually. It works both ways. You get less press, but it also means you get, when the press is bad, you get less bad press. I don't know, I kind of felt outside it all, but I didn't really feel. I saw it was quite fun coming in. I think it was a good time for music, because I think a lot of bands got to a stage when actually you couldn't make an album without spending a fortune and having all the big mixers and all the gear, and punk came in a bit like in a couple of amps and just do it, which I think was very healthy. And I think it was like shaking the apple tree. I think the good ones stayed and the bad ones came down. We managed to fool them all, obviously.
I did think that it's this, but they're not talking about us. They're talking about those other bands that I don't like either. I mean, good. Let's get rid of them other lot. They can't be talking about us. Of course they were talking about us, but I actually agreed. I loved all that stuff.
I don't think Genesis has ever really pandered to anything. I mean, styles or fashions. I think we've always been in our own little sort of world, really.
But now the cat comes in for the kill. This paw is raised from blood will spill. Yes, it will.
Well, I know Tony's fond of it. I'm fond of it. I think it was an album that was probably uncompromised. I think it's still an album. I think it was uncompromised by the need to have hit singles. I don't think there are too many of them on there. I think latterly, perhaps Afterglow could have made that a hit single. My Strongest Song, Blood on the Rooftops, I doubt would have made a single. But we were making an album at that time, and there weren't the pressures of having to do 3-minute songs that were going to be acceptable for video, etc. So I do think it's the band at its best, doing perhaps what it did best, at least with my inclusion in it. So I am very fond of it.
For me, it's one of my two favourite Genesis albums. I think it's got so many good moments on it, so that's the way I feel about it. But I think it's the most extreme of a certain kind of album. It's the most extreme in terms of the kind of the harmonic area, and probably the most complex in musical terms of all the albums we did, I think.
Well, the first interview I did in America, someone said to me, "So, why is the album called Number 3? And you think, oh God, it's going to be a long haul. Just seemed obvious, really. We were 3, so that was it.
I didn't see Steve leaving at all. I mean, he'd started to sort of make, I guess maybe sometimes at these sort of group dinners when everyone started getting past the nicely drunk stage to this kind of, let me tell you something stage. He kind of started, I think he started to make noises that, there's 4 of us in this band. Why can't I have 25% of the material, kind of thing,
I think Steve leaving was, I'm never quite sure to this day kind of what happened, really. We were mixing a live album and Phil saw him in the streets, and then he said hello, then didn't come in. It was sort of weird, really. I'm not sure we knew what was going on.
The first I heard about it was when I passed him and I stopped on in Ladbroke Grove, and because we were going to mix Seconds Out, and I stopped and I said, "Hey, hop in, I'll take you there." He was waiting for a cab. He said, "No, it's okay. I'll call you later." I said, "All right." And I didn't think anything of it. I just went and I got to the studio. I said, "Weird, I saw Steve." You know, he said, "Did he tell you?" I said, "Tell me what?" And Mike and Terry said, "Well, he's left." I said, "Oh, no, he didn't say that." And apparently, I've heard that that he knew. He said that he knew if he'd have got in that car with me, I was the one person that would have talked him out of it.
Perhaps he thought it was time to try and go solo and see it and play his chances. I always felt that I never felt that Steve necessarily saw himself ever as being totally integrated into the band, and that at some point he would probably leave. So I wasn't that surprised by it. I was surprised when he left, I have to say, because it was in the middle of the mixing of the live album, Seconds Out. And as I said, I really didn't. I was sorry to see him go. I really would have been very happy for him to be on after that.
Well, I was starting to write more and more material, and it was harder and harder to incorporate that into a band format. Plus, I wanted to work with other people. Brilliant though the members were of Genesis, and although I have many happy memories, I felt I had to take the risk in order to find out just how good I was on my own.
Everybody in this band was growing older and getting, discovering what they wanted to do that they hadn't done yet, and realising how they could do what they wanted to do better. It couldn't really exist in the same band anymore, so it didn't really surprise me that people kept falling off. But certainly, they'd weathered Anthony Phillips leaving, we'd all weathered Peter leaving, and I thought, well, if we did that, then Steve leaving will just be something else that we can just get over. I mean, Mike said, because he was obviously a guitar player, but he wasn't a lead guitar player, and he had a big mountain to climb.
We thought about another guitar player because having had Phil replace Peter from in-house, you knew the good feeling for the audience when it came from within the band. I suppose at that moment in time, guitar-wise, I'd done an awful lot of stuff had been two guitars. A lot of chordal stuff came from me, but I didn't really play lead. So that was, and Steve's a great lead player, but that was really the problem. But I think we felt we could sort it in-house.
I've got very, very fond memories of working with the band, and I learnt a tremendous amount from working with those guys.
Losing Steve, I think, slightly lost an ally in going and doing things a little bit weird sometimes. He would like to do weird things, and I like to do weird things, and we could sort of sometimes drag it that way for a bit longer. When it was just down to me, it was a bit different. But I think then there were three also. We were kind of felt we'd done the idea of trying to keep the songs a little more concise to get more ideas on the album was quite appealing. Something we'd sort of wanted to do, regardless. And even with one or two of the songs I wrote on this, because I wrote the song, say, "Burning Rope" on this album, which is kind of like, it looked like when I was writing it was going to be like One for the Vine. And in fact, there was the other sections that were in the song. And then I decided to kind of abbreviate it and not make it quite such a long thing. A, because I didn't want comparisons to that, and B, I thought, well, I've done that, I think I'll just leave it for this album and not do that. And then, so we could get more different ideas. But the other thing about this album was, I think this was the point when Phil was probably most distant from the group in many ways.
I was also going through my first divorce at this point. And so this was a lot of material. I contributed little bits again, but the material, the songs were kind of short, a little inconsequential, I felt.
The words of love, the cries of hate.
Much as I liked playing with Steve and everything, I don't think we really thought twice about this one. We felt we knew we could do this, having been through it with Pete. But also, I think what perhaps a lot of people hadn't realised up to that point was just how much of the rhythm guitar was all Mike. He's a rhythm guitarist, so the lead guitar and everything that came with that was Steve. But the rhythm guitar, which had been so prevalent in things like sort of Cinema Show or Musical Box or anything right the way through the whole career of Genesis, had been Mike. And so we knew he could do that. The only thing was whether he could cope with lead, and and he had to definitely had to work a bit of that to get sort of the right mindset for lead guitar. But on this album there's two or three, there's not much lead guitar, but what there is, he plays well, I think, but he had to think about it quite hard.
I think we just started to sort of maybe relax a bit, actually. You know, we were always very intense young men, trying to prove that we were the best and the greatest at everything. And suddenly, I don't know, you're getting a bit older, you had kids, and maybe you just start to, in life, not try so hard. Songs like Follow You, Follow Me and Many Too Many, for example, don't feel like anyone's trying at all. I think it's why they work well.
Probably have a slight problem here because the two other tracks that I would really pick out are both ones that I wrote, which were Undertow, which I was kind of pleased. It's sort of slightly different way for me to write, really, where there's sort of, you know, slightly less chord dependent and a bit more dependent. The melody and the piano part is very much sort of got the melody and the chords all enveloped in it, and I think it's, you know, and it was the first time I'd used the Yamaha CP70 electric piano on a record, and with the chorus sound and everything, it gives it quite a distinctive effect. And then Mike was playing a fretless bass on it. I think that turned out really well. To me, that's probably my favourite track on the album. And the other one that I like a lot is Many Too Many, which again is a love song, which again I wrote the lyrics, so I was obviously coming out of my shell here. Still a bit weird, it's not totally straightforward, but it's all I remember about Many Too Many was at the time we were doing it, that trying to say to Phil, yes, you can sing Mama, it's all right, you can sing Mama, which is the chorus is oh Mama, you know, doesn't it help me find the way and everything. And I said, Stevie Wonder uses Mama in his lyrics all the time, so you can do it. Because he was so against, you know, so he felt very self-conscious about doing it. Of course, about a couple of years later, there was a song which we did, obviously called Mama, where it's the main lyric all throughout the song. But at the time, it's sort of, you know, perhaps he felt it was a bit self-consciously trying to be, you know, what we weren't. But I think it sounds good. I know no one ever felt at the time that it didn't work from that point of view.
Many Too Many was really a Tony song. But sounds great. It's one of our sort of, once again, a bit like Blood and the Roots, I think, a rather forgotten song. And I hear it sounds great. The verse especially is really good. We played it live for a while, but it never quite connected like it could have done. But I thought it was a great song. We're starting once again to find slightly simpler styles of playing and writing. And once again, Tony lyrically was a little simpler here. So I think in a way it was sort of less desire to always prove that you can do complicated stuff and necessarily have to do the long songs to make it work. Getting better at writing short songs, really, actually. I've always felt proud of the songs. Actually, it's just simple songs are hard to write, but it's got a little bit of a sort of quality to it, I think, that is quite strong.
When we were recording it, the guy who was our engineer producer at the time, Dave Henschel, didn't rate it at all, and so he was a bit dismissive about it. And so we did a mix of it, which wasn't terribly good, I don't think. And then we played it to the record company, and they said, that's a hit, you've got to do it. So we went back and remixed it and got it a bit better. So we thought it was a hit. I mean, I felt it was the first time I thought we'd ever written a hit.
Like most of our things, it's an accident. I remember Follow You, Follow Me. At the time, we saw it as being a longer song, I think. We're going to try and take that riff and make it into a solo song. It wasn't going for a song especially. But like most accidents in music, I had that guitar riff and Tony started playing some chords underneath it. I mean, you know, and then Phil just started singing along, and it just seemed it came together very easily. And I also remember something about the lyrics, for once. The easiest song to write lyrically I've ever written in my life. It took about 10 minutes. I sat down and it just came out very easily. They're not astounding words, but I think being simple and not being embarrassing is often quite hard. They just seem, and I thought, well, I can't be that easy, you know. And I thought they're so simple. Stay with me, and I thought, I don't know, can I? You know, we'd come from a much more complicated background of lyric writing, and I thought I can't just do that, can I? But it's an interesting song because it's a very simple song, and I think the way Phil sang it just captured a certain simplicity and mood that was a little pop song, but actually quite a genuine little piece of music.
We were very lucky that Follow You, Follow Me was a hit, because it meant that we suddenly, you know, we were kind of suddenly on radio, so that people couldn't ignore us, really.
It was just as another step on that ladder, you know, that made us a bigger band than we were before, and you know, playing to more people, more interest, more play on the radio. Suddenly, a few girls in the audience, you know.
I remember reading Pete Townsend in an article saying about Follow Follow Me. He thought it was a great little, on the radio, a really nice little song that sort of was just classy without being simple, without being at all trite, you know.
I remember when Chester Thompson joined the live band playing drums, he said that on the Weather Report bus that they always used to play that song. And I thought, all right, God, we've done something right if Weather Report like it. I mean, if Wayne Shorter and Joe Zawinul can listen to this and say, this English stuff's cool, man. I thought we've done something right. So in a way, it was, for me, you know, because I kind of used to nail this box down and say, why can't we do something that's, you know, kind of edgy? Why can't we do something that's kind of cool and hip, you know? Anyway, it looks like we had done something, although then it became a pop single, which kind of took the edge off the edgy, cool, hip thing. But it actually, you know, it's still played on the radio today, and it's kind of, you know, it's a lot of people's favourite song from that period.
You must remember this came out in the middle of sort of, I don't know, was it just after punk? I don't know. It was kind of a strange thing. We were sort of still surviving. Couldn't quite work out why, because everyone else seemed to have gone. You know, ELP had died, Yes had died, and everything like this, and we were still going along. And we were lucky to have this, perhaps this hit single, which sort of came out suddenly in the middle of all this, and we were okay.
Duke's a very important album. I think if Duke hadn't happened, we wouldn't have carried on, I think, in my mind, because I think we sort of refound ourselves a little bit. I suppose by then we'd done some solo albums, I remember rightly. So you were less pushy about stuff you'd written. Phil was living alone in his house, actually, in Guildford, and we wrote it there. That was quite nice too, you know what I mean? Sort of in one of the bedrooms, actually. Nice environment. Phil was writing a lot more now, and we started writing songs together again. Turn It On Again came out of that. Duke, the intro of Duke.
By this point, chronologically, I'd left the band, gone to Vancouver after In Another Three to save my marriage. They went off and did their solo records while I sorted myself out. I came back. They were in the middle of their solo albums, so they kind of had to finish them. I didn't have anything to do, so I did what was to become Face Value. That was my first solo record. And then when all that was finished, we got together and we moved all the gear into my house. I moved everything out of the master bedroom, you know, and I already had the second bedroom as my little studio. So we moved everything out of the master bedroom and we wrote and set up and wrote all these songs together.
I think we came in there with the intention of trying to sort of, a little bit barren of ideas, so we sat down and did a lot more improvising. And some of the ideas I had that hadn't really developed, I had this riff, which was the opening part of Behind the Lines, which was doing, which was just almost just a rotating sort of riff, four different in four keys. And I hadn't really developed it, so we sat down and started playing it, and then immediately started developing little ideas came and things, and then in fact the whole song which came from it was actually just a development of that first part, but it wasn't something written beforehand at all. So it very much emerged in the studio from that one idea, and that's how a lot of the things happened on this a bit. Something like Duchess would really developed, I think, more than anything out of the drum machine.
We'd been to Japan in '78, end of '77, for the first time for a couple of weeks, and because they were treated us like royalty, and Roland, which is a Japanese company, or was then anyway, but I don't know that now, but they gave us one of the each one of these drum machines that were fresh off the production line, programmable slightly, and not quite cha-cha-cha waltz, but a little bit of that, but still original. And I said, I don't thank you very much, thank you. Anyway, then of course I went back and I had this marriage stuff going on. Then I ended up with my studio and I said, could I have my drum machine, please? I think I might be needing this. So I started to write what was to become Face Value. Of course, In the Air Tonight uses that drum machine is all over the place on that record. And of course it was actually in the next room where we wrote Duchess, you know. So it was a thing where, you know, people could play and this could keep time to it while I could sing, you know. And all the fading in and fading out of things. It was good fun. But the drums played a big part of it, because you thought you had the sound and then suddenly the drums come in and suddenly it goes cinemascope. You know.
That first time we ever used one was really exciting, you know, because the whole thing was it would kind of carry on without you having to do anything. That was what was nice about it, you know. So you could try something and then if it didn't work, whereas a drummer always wants to do something fiddly. A drum machine just keeps on relentlessly doing the same thing. So I'd used it as an aid to when I was writing on my first solo album, A Curious Feeling. I'd used the drum machine very much as a sort of basis to sort of write against, but I didn't end up using any of it specifically on the album, which I slightly regret now. Whereas on this, we did on that one track, and it gave it a very distinctive feel. And in Duchess, you know, and I mean, Duchess is probably one of my favourite tracks we've ever done. Very simple, a lyric that sort of is very easy to relate to in the sense of sort of the rise and fall of a female rock star, really, which we call Duchess. You know, we could have called it Madonna if we'd sort of thought about it, but because Madonna hadn't been created by that point, but it would have been more interesting, wouldn't it? For me, this is the first album where he really sounds like a singer. I have to be honest about that. I mean, there's some lovely singing on the previous albums, but it's not as convincing as it is on this album, I think. You know, I just think some of the singing on it is really good, you know, not just on the songs he wrote, but the things, I mean, Duchess, I think the singing on that is really tremendous. You know, I just think it's sort of, he also knew what to do a bit. You know, when I wrote because I wrote the lyric and the melody to Duchess on what we'd done as an improvisation, and I did a version of it and I sang it, made a tape of it and played it and things, and it's all the elements are there, but when he sang it, it's not just that he's got a better voice than me, it was the fact that all the little kind of embellishments and tales and things that happened on it just transformed it completely from being something like a sort of session guy might do to something that a singer does, and his own character is sort of right across it for that reason, and the resultant effect is very, very strong.
I think by this point I had done all my demos for Face Value, and Face Value was it wasn't finished, it wasn't even probably recorded in its finished stage, but I'd been through the process of a writer. I mean, I'd written all the Face Value stuff by the time we wrote Duke, so I'd changed. I'd become a songwriter. I mean, I'd become more of a singer because I was singing songs, you know, that I'd written, and emoting, if you like, and being, you know, kind of putting things out there. So yes, it probably is true that Duke was the first album where I kind of felt more comfortable as a singer.
Phil's writing stuff on his own helped change the balance too, I think, actually, because he's always had a very good feel for writing songs that work, you know, in sort of 4 minutes, which was never our forte, and that I think helped balance the album too.
As a writer, he was contributing more to the band now than he had done in the past. I'd still say that this album is still more dominated by what Mike and I wrote, but Phil was coming up much more to be a kind of equal kind of writer, which I think was as a strength, you know, I think because we had the variety which each of us gave, you know, he had a directness. You know, if Phil's I'm the least direct, and Mike's and Phil's the most direct, and then Mike's somewhere in the middle, and the combination could work quite well. We'd pull each other in different directions. I'd make him, you know, expand a bit, and then he'd make me contract, which was not a bad thing to do. Otherwise, every song would be 25 minutes long. Then.
By this point, we'd really, I think, had decided that what we did best, or what we preferred doing, now we were our solo outlets, was actually doing things we couldn't do anywhere else, which was write together. So we kind of did bring a couple of songs each to the project, which was less than ever before, and that was to become even less on the next record. But Tony brought a couple of songs in, Mike brought a couple of songs in, I brought a couple of songs in. Tony insists that I never played him in the air tonight. I did. He claims that I didn't, but I did because I was very proud of it. But he says that if he'd have heard it, he would have wanted to do it in Genesis. But anyway, I think along the way here, we were starting to get a bit harder and edgier about what certainly harder and edgier than there were three.
I held the book so tightly in my hands. I saw your picture, heard you call my name.
Nearly everything on Duke really actually has a live. It actually sounds almost the way we wrote it, because we recorded it live for us. You know, I mean, we went, once we'd written the songs, we went to Polar Studios, where I hadn't worked there yet. No, I worked there a few times afterwards. But they'd just opened this wonderful studio of ABBA's, and we went there, had a big live room, because I'd worked in a live room in London, and I wanted to get that sound, but we didn't want to go there, so we went, found out they had a lovely, great big drum room. I think Zeppelin had recorded there actually, and that's where we heard some stuff. And it was a fantastic studio, and we did Duchess. I mean, Duchess is one of my favourite songs. I heard it the other night, and really, that was one of those things where you really did capture something that we kind of couldn't really do properly in rehearsal, because it's got drums, drum machine, I'm singing, and it's all, it's all got to be there, and couldn't do that justice in rehearsal, but in the studio it just came alive, and that was done very, very quickly. Duke's Travels, Duke's End, all that stuff. I mean, it's very, very strong. Behind the Lines, a lot of energy, and the live drum sound, the live feeling of everything in the band. I mean, that was, to me, the first time we'd started to sound good on record.
We have a habit of doing what we do, but I do think that there's a bit of concept to try and get back to writing together. I think the solo stuff made it possible. You know, when you're doing albums and you had three guys bringing in lots of songs, it was hard to actually find enough room. But with the solo albums being done, you had less stuff to bring in. You didn't say, here are my 10 songs, or any of them any good sort of thing. You actually arrived with a few bits and less material, which is probably a good reason.
A Misunderstanding was a song that I'd written kind of based on a kind of a rhythm. It was a little bit between Hold the Line and Toto and Sail on Sailor by the Beach Boys. I love that kind of, when that Rocky Mountain Way by Joe Walsh, that kind of rock thing, when it's just in the right place, and so that's how I'd written it. I don't say it ended up being as good as that, but that was and I was going to have it on face value, and then I played this stuff to the guys, and Tony and Mike really liked that because of the same reasons. They like the Beach Boys kind of that rock thing. That was a rock thing. It's like ding, 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 ding. So they took that song and we recorded it, and I guess because it had single written all over it in America, it was the first single.
There must be some misunderstanding. Must be some kind of mistake.
It was our first American hit. A song that Phil was gaining confidence in writing, I think, and it sat very comfortably within the album, I think. But I think the main thing is started to write together again, what I think was really important for us. And I think after that we kind of carried on more in that vein.
At one point, I think we thought that we could revisit the idea of doing alongside, maybe split, like having bands, because we're still talking about vinyl at this point. Like Supper's Ready, something that was like a body of work. And I think we kind of, that's why there's Duke's Travels, Duke's End, because that's kind of, we still like those titles, and we kind of, that's all that's left of that idea, really.
Yes, that it would have gone Behind the Lines, Duchess, Guide Vocal, Turn It On Again, Duke's Travels, Duke's End, which is actually how we performed it when we were live. We tried it. The reason we didn't do it, one reason we didn't do it, is we didn't want the comparisons with Supper's Ready, and felt maybe it wasn't the moment to do a sort of a totally combined thing like that. As it is, there is quite a lot of linkage between those tracks anyhow. The first three are linked. And at the time when we were talking about this, the bit that became Turn It On Again was just a link. It was just we went once around the whole sequence, just the 2 bits, and then went on into Duke's Travels. Well, and we did it, and we recorded all this stuff, and I thought that's much too strong to just do once, so we did it twice.
Turn On Again was a song. I had this guitar riff that I was playing much slower, actually. And Phil said, just try it, pick it up a lot and try it like this. I was going do 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 at one point with a sort of Queen harmony guitars. I don't know why I got to that point. I was just messing around with it.
My bit was slow too, in fact. We were playing the whole it was more like that. And then Phil he said I don't know, he was kind of in a certain kind of mood in those days, and the drums are what make it. I mean, absolutely, the drums are what make it, which is a sort of key thing. That's why it's so much a group song, even though musically it came from the 2 of us. But it's and it just gave it an energy and something that we hadn't seen in it at all originally.
And it shows how someone can come and just take an idea how a band works. If he hadn't done that, it wouldn't have had that driving feel to it. He said to me, "Do you realise it's not in 4/4?" Which I thought it was in 4/4.
It's got a good drum part that makes it sound simple rather than making it sound as complicated as it is. So that's one of the reasons why it could be a single. I think if you told the record company it was in 13/8, they'd have said I couldn't be a single. The catchy part, as you came at the end, turn it on, turn it on, turn it on. It then became a stage classic, and then, much to the annoyance, I think, of most Genesis fans, we did a Blues Brothers parody at the end of it, which they'll be pleased to know that we've ditched for this last tour. In fact, we've brushed it up and dusted it down, and it's back to its original state.
It was a hit single, and of course it's a slightly... I often wonder whether Turn On Again would have been even played on the radio if we hadn't had Follow You Follow Me, because it's a more complex piece of music, and it's deceptively simple because it has an extra beat every sort of third bar or whatever it is, and I think it goes through a lot of chords and things. And as you say, the chorus, there is no sort of particular chorus line until the end of the song, so you kind of you wonder whether it would have been. In fact, when we played this to the record company, this album to the record company, they said, "Oh, there's a great hit on there." We said, "Yeah, we know, it's Turn On Again." They said, "Oh, no, it's Alone Tonight." We said, "Alone Tonight," oh God, no. And we said, "No, it's got to be Turn On Again." So we went with that. Well, I think for one reason or another, we weren't very happy with the and then there were 3 cover. We just felt it was sort of didn't really do much. It was a bit nebulous and everything, and we were a bit stuck for ideas. And I don't think Hypnosis came up with their best idea for that, really. I mean, it sort of has a character to it because you kind of relate it to the album now, really. But thinking that the album was probably kind of a bit more straightforward and quite fresh. It's got a very gloomy, dark cover. I think you could have had something a little bit more kind of up. But that's our fault as much as anything else. I think with Duke, we just thought, well, we want something different, so we went to looked in a different area for a designer, and he actually came down with various suggestions of possibilities. And one thing he came down with was this ABC done by this French guy, which had this character on it. And we looked through this, and we thought we really like this style. It's great. And we looked through the book, and we got to Q, and had this. What is actually the album cover? Which it had a Q, a question mark above it, because it was just a simple alphabet book. We took the question mark out and used it, really.
If you can find something you like and see it, commissioning an album cover is always hard, because if they produce it, having shot it and spent money and gone somewhere with a photograph, they come back and you see you don't like it, you always feel a bit obliged to sort of try and work with it. Whereas this, you could see it, and you knew his style and what he did. I think it's a great cover, actually.
It was just nice. I mean, we calling the album Duke, and there was this guy, this fat guy. It just, he wasn't Duke, but he could be. It was just, it was a nice, strong piece of artwork. Yeah.
We've always been very keen, I think, Genesis, on quite simple images, graphic ones, rather than a mishmash of lots of ideas. I think Duke kind of embodies that. It's a really simple, strong, quirky style image.
This album, I have to be honest, this is my favourite Genesis album, really. it has such a sort of positive quality about it. I love the way it starts. When I say I love Duchess, it works fantastically, and I love all the instrumental stuff towards the end too. I think although it starts a little weak, but it just gets really good. And there's a strong emotional moment when it gets to the repeat of guide vocal done within Duke's Travels, which is a very intense piece of sort of singing and everything. And I think that's to me is one of the strongest. This is one of those very strong moments in Genesis music.
Well, Abacab originally was a way of remembering the sequence of the song. A was the verse, B was the chorus, A was the verse, C was the bridge. So you went verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus. But we didn't do the song like that in the end. But our way of remembering it was just, it goes A, B, A, C, A, B, all right? The way we did it in the end was unpronounceable. But the name stuck.
It just sort of felt quite good. And then when we were thinking about titling the album and the song, really, particularly the album, we wanted to get across this more abstract nature of it. We felt this was the most unromantic thing we'd done, whereas Wind and Wuthering was only 3 albums before it had been so romantic. This was much less romantic. A lot of the album's tracks were very stark and much more kind of, had a much more straightforward approach, I suppose. And we wanted to get that across with the cover, so we went with a totally abstract design on the cover. But it's not definable. It just looks, it's just got nice sort of shapes and colours, and gave the title, which Abacab, which means nothing at all really, as a title. So the thing was like an abstract painting, is why I saw it really, and that was the final effect. So you didn't really get any particular kind of thing off the album at all. Before you heard it, it was kind of, you just knew that it wasn't going to be. Goblins and fairies. That's about what you knew it wasn't going to be that. So, and that's right, it wasn't.
I think with Duke and the cover, we did think that this isn't quite as ornate as some of the other, as maybe as feminine as some of the other covers. Wind and Wuthering particularly, and earlier. And then there were 3 was a photographic cover, but here was like something. This was like punk album, if you like, and this was, wow, this is a Genesis cover. And our thinking was, well, if this is the cover, maybe the music's different.
I can't imagine us playing the same kind of stuff and music and sound that we did back in early 70s and not changing, because I think, to be honest, the journey's been interesting as a writer and as a recorder of music, and I think if you stayed in the same place, I'd have been bored stiff years ago. I think you've got to move all the time. I think. On this album, we felt it really was time to cut with the past a bit, and drop the traditional. There's a long song from Tony and there's a short acoustic one from me and something. It was just time to be a bit braver. And that coincided with moving into where we are now, Fisher Lane Farmer Studios. It had been a dream since we first started to actually have our own place to write and record in. Rather than go and write the songs and then start recording £1,000 a day in a studio, to actually be in that environment where you can write, and if it sounds good, you record it.
So we bought this place in Surrey. We were looking at the garage. The people were trying to show us around the house, and we were looking at the garage saying, that garage would do all right. But what about the house? Yeah, the house is all right, yeah. The garage, we could knock that down, So eventually we bought a sort of a 5 or 6 car garage with a house attached, and started to convert that into the studio. And the house, we thought the roadies could live in, and we actually started off writing the Abacab album in the house because the studio wasn't ready, of course. And Abacab, I can remember that very well, that song being written in a sort of, low Tudor beams living room. And we'd, by this point, thought it was time to change people we worked with a bit.
It was a definite, very conscious decision here to try and break with some of the Genesis traditions, really. Get rid of the reprises, the extended solos, the big choruses and tambourines and everything, just to have something, a different approach. And because Phil had this experience of working on Peter's album, particularly, but of this drum sound, effect. And then we'd use the engineer 𝗜HP who'd worked on that album. And a lot of the size of the tracks are created by the drums rather than by keyboards. We'd always started with keyboards. The big keyboard pad came in on the chorus and something was wide and everything. With the drums themselves, just by bringing up the ambient sound of the kit, just gave it such a big size. Very exciting effect, I think. I really liked it. And it meant you could write in a slightly different way and have a different approach. The drums are very, very prominent on this album, I think, and they're a very, very big feature of it.
The band kind of sounded like the sound Hugh got was the sound we made. Not taking anything away from Hugh, but it's a bit like in the past. The sound, I'd hear the band playing songs, and the sound was great. We'd go and record it. It was a bit like I struggled to get the sound back up to where it was when we first played it. You know, it was always a bit of an uphill job. But with Hugh, we recorded very much a playing scenario. The sound sounded kind of like we were, which is wonderful.
We started to scale down a little bit. Keyboard arrangements, we started to scale down. Do we really need that overdub? Do we really need the sound to be that thick, you know? I mean, everybody used to be a bit tunnel vision, you know, this is my sound, I like it, and I'm going to use it, you know? And we were now getting a bit better in the studio, a bit more used to sort of what we want it to sound like, and also trying to reinvent ourselves, because punk had left some mark, and, you know, we realised that, you know, we didn't want to be kind of, although we still were and still are, but we didn't really want to be thought of as being that, you know, stuck in that thing. And actually, when we played this Abacab album live, I remember in Holland, in this particular place called Leiden in Holland, we were booed every time we played an Abacab track. They booed us. They didn't like the scaled down thing at all. And because on the album there was some things like on No Reply at All. I mean, I'd been working with the Earth, Wind & Fire horns. I thought, if we're going to reinvent ourselves, why not have some horns on there? I mean, this is a song here we've written that sounds like kind of funky thing, you know, R&B thing. Why not have horns on it? Who says we can't have horns on it? It's our fucking record, you know? So we did it, and people hated it.
If I remember rightly, Phil's solo album was done before Abacab and came out and was a huge, it was kind of strange, it was a huge hit while we were, I remember In the Air went to number 4 while we were actually writing the album here. But the album was kind of going that way anyway, you know what I mean, with that sort of sound feel. I'm sure very much brought in by Phil, who was sort of full of excitement for having come back and done his album and got a sort of slightly more different sound feel. And the horns came from very much from Phil. And here we went out to LA to do it, the Phoenix horns. And I always remember, I didn't really know the Phoenix horns, who were the guys in Earth, Wind & Fire. The band I didn't really know. And I went to LA with Phil and Hugh, and I was expecting that they got the charts in. The guys came in, lovely guys came in and got the charts out. And I thought they'd go 1, 2, 3, 4 and go bada baba, beat it on right. And the first time they played it, absolute chaos, you know, all over the shop. Out of time, wrong notes, you know. I thought these are the hottest guys around. But then I realised what happens is after a while, they're quite characters, quite funky guys. After a while, they lock in and they don't play the right notes. They have a sound. That's what I didn't realise. And when the sound works and they're tightened together, there's a definite sound. It's not just any 4 guys couldn't do that. Those guys did it together. So it was fun to do and different.
And there's no reply at all. There's no reply at all.
We did our own punk track as well, Who Done It, which was fantastic. I mean, it was just, Tony Banks had this keyboard, I don't know, I mean, it was like he was just fiddling around with it. He had and he was just trying to get this different sound. And it was all in rhythm for some reason, and sort of I started playing, and that was it. It was the most horrible sound that we really liked.
For many people, it's kind of, you know, the worst track we ever did. Because I really like it, but perhaps I'm just perverse. I had this thing of abusing a Prophet 5, and I'd sit there and I'm doing this all the time, and Mike and Phil were just sort of, the only way we're going to shut him up is if we record this. So we recorded it. And Phil put on this very simple, very slappy sort of drum on it. And then he wrote a lyric for it, which was like, you know, which kind of was as irritating as the song itself.
Was it you or was it me? Or was it he or she? And then we did it live, you know, it was fantastic. people used to put goggles on with snorkels and stuff. It was a kind of surreal moment.
You mention it around here sometimes, sort of, some of the roadies and things, not too done it. But anyhow, I think that was quite good. And when we played it to the Americans, the album, because we had 2 or 3 other songs we could have put on it, and there was a possibility of not using Who Done It. And I remember Ahmet Ertegun saying, you've got to put that track on. Because I think it's just because it had such a character to it. Because we had a very, very nice romantic song called You Might Recall, which was recorded at this time, which, was a strong contender for the album. But in the end, we decided to go for the ugly rather than the beautiful.
Keep It Dark was a fun song because actually it was a drum loop. Phil played this. I think I'm right. Yes, it was. It was a drum loop. Phil played this sound, this pattern, straight beat, which actually there's a moment when he was playing it. The sound is so good, just right, that we actually looped it. And then I think in those days you actually got a bit of tape and hung a weight on it, and it actually looped it down, and we played to it. It had a great sort of heavy sound, and I think the song always kind of worked that way.
We wanted to try to keep that kind of the inhuman aspect of it. I think is what we liked about it. It becomes something inhuman and relentless. And when a thing repeats absolutely like that, it becomes almost subliminal. So you pay too much attention to it. And then Mike had this. He was playing this riff, which kind of like goes very much against the rhythms. As the two things are kind of quite strangely positioned. If you hear it, sometimes you hear it and think, God, it's all out of time. And then the chorus comes in and all the chords are sort of anticipated and things, and the resultant effect is kind of strange. That it's all doing this a bit, but I think the resultant song, I think it works really well. I mean, it's just a lovely sort of, got very stark verses, and very romantic choruses, and I kind of wrote a lyric that kind of did that. So the idea was that this character had to pretend that he'd just been robbed by people, and that's why he disappeared for a few weeks. And in fact, what had happened to him, he'd been taken up in a spaceship and gone to this fantastic world where everything was wonderful and beautiful and everything, but he couldn't tell anybody that because no one would believe him. So I thought it was quite a nice idea.
And the other song I remember too is Man in the Corner, which was Phil and the drum machine. And it had one of those lovely beats that he does, which until you know where one is, you haven't got a clue. The drum machine comes in, and I think, if I don't count from one and just listen to it, I haven't got a clue where one is. And then you find it and it's great. But many a night we did it on stage. Actually, Tony kind of going, where the fuck is one? If you miss that moment, then you can't get it. No, great song.
It is simplified, there's less kind of extraneous stuff in there, certainly. And I think, the tracks that, things like Abacab and obviously Keep It Dark, which is one of my favourite tracks on this album, it's very simple. And it's just one riff. And it was actually just a drum loop. It wasn't even drummed all the way through, just had a drum riff going all the way through it. And I just think it produced it has a very distinctive quality about it. I think what it did for us was it took us, having gone in a certain direction a certain way, we then went quite a long way a different direction. And then perhaps after that we kind of brought a bit of that, came back a bit, but brought a bit of that in with us from then on. And I think it was an important move, really. So this album, in fact, was the last album we credit anything to individuals. And we each put one track of our own on there. And everything else was group written. And it was very much group written. It was the way it emerged out of just jamming and improvising, and these ideas would evolve.
I really enjoyed the Abacab thing. I think at the time we were stretching out a lot more. I mean, the end of Abacab on the record was all improvised, and we were still writing all that stuff from sitting in a room with nothing, thin air.
The funny thing was, at the same time, Peter was changing. Actually, had changed probably before us. This change was coming. I mean, that's why I think often the hardcore fans don't see it. But this transition from where we were when the album before Phil started singing The Lamb was the start of an end of a sort of era, and then the new phase is coming, really, I think, actually. Inevitable for us to survive, I think, actually.